Thanks, Christy. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great day today. I know it's a crazy time of year as we get ready for our students to return to the classrooms. I know in my area, school started yesterday, so I'm sure if you're not in school already, you're prepping for that. And I appreciate your taking the time to join us for this webinar today. Today, we're going to be talking about Read Live, which is our online platform. And I'm just going to give you a big picture overview of the 4 programs that are included in that platform. So the 4 programs in Read Live are Read Naturally Live, Word Warm-Ups Live, 1 Minute Reader Live, and Read Naturally Live Español. Today, we'll be looking at each program briefly. We'll talk about its purpose, the benefits for students, the type of content that's included, who the program is appropriate for, suggested guidelines for use, and a look at the steps that students complete in each program. And we'll also compare and contrast the features of some of the programs to help you understand the differences. So Read Naturally is a comprehensive research-based reading intervention. It was first created over 30 years ago, and it's evolved through several formats. The very latest implementation of the Read Naturally strategy is found in our online platform called Read Live. And Read Live has 4 research-based intervention programs built into it. When you purchase a student license, that student has access to all 4 programs. All of the programs in Read Live allow you to differentiate instruction in an RTI MTSS model. And Read Live can be used anywhere, in the classroom or for remote learning. Today, we're talking about a strategy that helps students improve their fluency and also supports comprehension and vocabulary development. But remember, there's more to reading development than fluency. And the strategy we're looking at today is not intended to be a comprehensive reading program. This strategy is intended to be used as one part of a well-balanced reading program that also includes grade level instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, and comprehension. So what is reading fluency? We know that reading fluency is not speed reading. A lot of our students have that misunderstanding when we first start talking to them about the rate at which they speak. We know that fluent readers are able to read orally with an appropriate speed, accuracy, and proper expression, whereas non-fluent readers are going to have difficulty in at least one of those aspects of reading. They might make a lot of mistakes or read very slowly, or they don't read with appropriate expression and phrasing. Why do we focus on fluency? Well, educators have recognized for years that fluency is an important aspect of reading, and researchers agree. Actually, over 30 years of research indicates that fluency is one of the critical building blocks of reading because it's directly related to comprehension. From the very beginning, Read Naturally's programs have been aligned with the science of reading and based in research. Here are the results of one study that show how oral reading fluency correlates highly with reading comprehension. With this type of data, a perfect match would be 1.0. So you can see here that all of these measures have a high correlation with comprehension. But oral reading fluency is by far the strongest, with a 0.91 correlation. And many researchers have found that fluency is highly correlated with reading comprehension. When a student reads fluently, they're likely to understand what they read. But why is that? We have research from Dr. S.J. Samuels, who's well known for his work in fluency, who put forth a theory called the automaticity theory. And it goes something like this. We have a limited amount of mental energy. So if we're trying to multitask or to be proficient at a task like reading, which is really very complex, first you need to master the component tasks so that you can do them automatically. For example, if you have a reader who is focusing all their attention on decoding individual words, they're not going to have enough mental energy left over to think about the meaning of the text. However, a fluent reader who's automatic at decoding the words can instead give full attention to comprehending the text. And to become proficient readers, our students need to become automatic with the text so they can pay attention to the meaning. So we're going to do a little activity to learn how very automatic we actually are with reading. So I want you to start off and just read silently quietly to yourself the words in the first couple lines of text here. That's really easy, right? Now try this. Don't read the words. Instead, I want you to name the color of the letters in each of the words. Ready? Begin. That was a lot harder, wasn't it? It's hard to name the colors because you're already automatic with those words. You just can't stop reading them, even when you're really trying not to. So because you all are automatic readers, you can put all of your mental energy into building meaning from a text. So while you read, you're comparing the characters, you're predicting outcomes, maybe even doing a little soul searching. And that's what we want for all of our students. I want you to think for a minute about a non-fluent reader that you've heard read out loud recently. Imagine what that student sounds like when they're reading, and think of some words that might describe how they sound. Are these some of the words you came up with? Certainly, the student might be halting, laborious. It might be painful to listen to them. They might ignore punctuation or make a lot of errors while they're reading. We know that all students do not read this way. If you have students who are already reading fluently and comprehending the text, they probably don't need a supplemental reading intervention program. But for developing readers or students who do struggle with fluency, a supplemental reading intervention program like Read Live can really benefit them. So, how do you identify which students need reading intervention and which students should focus on another aspect of reading? Simply, you need to listen to each student read aloud. We know what a non-fluent reader sounds like. We just described one. But we have some research about reading rates that help us to be more precise in determining which students need reading intervention. So, this is the Hasbrouck-Tyndall table, and it can help you identify which students are going to need extra help to become automatic readers. This table shows the oral reading fluency norms for the 50th percentile in grades 1 through 6 across the United States. It's based on the work of Jan Hasbrouck and Gerald Tyndall. They combined data for hundreds of thousands of students to create the norms in this table. Previous data indicates that the words correct per minute at the 50th percentile for 6th grade and above is about the same. So you can use those 6th grade norms for older students as well. And when you look at this table, let's remember that it's the trends that are important, not the individual numbers. Let's take a look at 3rd graders in the fall who are at the 50th percentile. They're going to read around 83 words correct per minute. When they progress through the school year, notice what happens. The number of correct words per minute increases throughout the year, from the fall to the winter to the spring. And we see that same pattern for students at each grade level. Now let's think about what happens to a 3rd grader with average fluency rates above the 50th percentile and compare that to a 3rd grader with average fluency rates below the 50th percentile. So here's our fairly proficient 3rd grader. They might have an average fluency rate of 104 words correct per minute in the fall, and they might progress to an average fluency rate of 139 words correct per minute by the spring. But a struggling 3rd grader might have an average fluency rate of only 59 words correct per minute in the fall and reach an average fluency rate of only 91 words correct per minute by spring. What's the problem here? There's a big gap, isn't there? Both of these students have made progress during the year, but at the end of the year, that struggling reader is still below where the fairly proficient reader was at the beginning of the year. Notice as well that there's a ceiling beyond which we don't expect our students to perform. Even those upper level students in the 90th percentile in the spring are not going to read aloud much faster than 200 words correct per minute. And most students are going to level off at about 150 words correct per minute. Most adults read somewhere between 150 and 200 words per minute. So when we're using these norms, you'll use your students' fall, winter, or spring benchmark scores and compare them to this chart. We'll talk a little bit later about screening and benchmarking. Most of you probably have a tool that your district or school uses. Remember, if a student's score on that screening or benchmarking tool is 10 or more words below the 50th percentile, they probably need a fluency building intervention that also supports comprehension and vocabulary. That's our general guideline. Maybe your district has different indicators about students being at high, medium, or low risk. Some of your students will probably also need further diagnostic assessments to pinpoint those additional areas of need like phonics or vocabulary. So before we move on, take a look at the table and find the norms for the students you work with. Remember, these grade levels are their actual grade level, not their instructional level. And this table is also in your handout. Okay, so we've identified which students need reading fluency intervention. How do we help them improve their fluency and ultimately their comprehension? We know that students become fluent by reading. There are students that learn to read fluently without explicit instruction. But for others, fluency does not develop in the course of typical classroom instruction. And research analyzed by the National Reading Panel in 2000 suggests that just encouraging our students to read independently is not the most effective way to improve their reading achievement. If we just encourage our at-risk students to read more, it's not going to result in increased reading on their part, right? What do your at-risk students do during that sustained silent reading time? I know in my classroom, they would get a book with pictures or a book that looked like everybody else's book, and they pretend to read. They're not actually reading and understanding the text. Think about this for a minute. In a 10-minute reading period, a proficient reader who reads 200 words per minute silently could read about 2,000 words. In that same 10-minute period, an at-risk student who reads 50 words per minute would only read 500 words. So these two students are spending the same amount of time reading, but they're definitely not reading the same number of words. So think about how that disparity is going to play out over the course of the year. What can we do? We need these students to read more, but simply asking them to read on their own is not going to work. The National Reading Panel concluded that a more effective course of action is for us to explicitly teach developing readers how to read fluently, step by step. So we have a three-part strategy that we use in our programs to support our students in improving their fluency, comprehension, and overall reading achievement. And the first part of that strategy is teacher modeling. Notice and remember that teacher modeling is more than just listening to someone else read, because we know that just listening or watching someone do something isn't going to make us skilled at that act or that task. We want our students to be actively involved in the act of reading 100% of the time in a multisensory way. They're going to be tracking and subvocalizing as they're reading. Teacher modeling teaches word recognition in a meaningful context. It demonstrates correct phrasing, and it gives our students practice tracking across the page. A child can benefit from teacher modeling once they know at least 50 sight words and have a good sense of beginning sounds. We also know that the reading rate of the model reader is important. Christopher Skinner was a reading researcher who found that students who read lists of words with him slowly became more fluent with those words than students who read with him at a faster rate. That slower rate lets our students learn new words and clarify difficult words, and they're naturally going to become more fluent. The next technique that research has shown significantly builds reading fluency is repeated reading. This is when students are reading the same material multiple times to build their accuracy and expression. Well, what happens when students are reading those passages again and again? LaBerge and Samuels studied this in the 1970s. They found that when their students reread passages, they got faster at reading the passages, they understood them better, and they were able to read subsequent passages better as a result of that repeated reading. And this is because repeated reading is a form of mastery learning. The students had read the same words, so they began to know them, and they're able to identify them in other text. The final component of our three-part strategy is progress monitoring. This is the element that combines giving students a goal to work toward and providing feedback on their progress toward that goal, which we all know is very motivating for students and adults for that matter. In Read Live programs, our students have a specific individualized reading rate goal, and they know exactly what they need to do to meet it. They're going to get immediate feedback from the program. They're going to know that they met that goal even before you do. And this progress monitoring is what motivates students to practice reading the same story over and over until they have mastered it. So here is how those three pieces can be combined into a single powerful strategy. The student begins by getting a baseline for progress monitoring. They're going to read a story for the very first time and get their cold score. It's a timed reading for 1 minute, and that resulting score represents the number of words they read correctly in a minute. So the score is recorded here on this graph in blue. Teacher modeling happens when the student reads along with an audio recording of the story, sub-vocalizing with the narration, until they're able to read the story without errors. Usually, a student will read along 2 or 3 times, and that will vary depending on the age and ability of the student. Next, the student repeatedly times themselves reading the story aloud, and they use their scores on each subsequent reading to check their progress. They keep reading the story until they can read at their individual goal rate. Once they've met their goal, they move on to answer some comprehension questions. Then they continue to practice or play Wordtastic, which is our vocabulary game, while they're waiting for their teacher. Finally, the teacher listens to the student read. A student who reads with good expression at their goal rate with 3 or fewer errors and answers the comprehension questions correctly is going to pass the story. The HOT score is graphed here in red, and that gives the student visual feedback on how much improvement was made as they worked on that story. Over time, we'll see our students show improvement in their cold and hot scores. Combining these three strategies in this way has dramatic results for developing and struggling readers. Candace Einot developed this strategy by combining teacher modeling, repeated reading, and progress monitoring. She used it in her 3rd grade collaborative classroom with 5 students with disabilities and some Title I students as well. So in phase 1 of the study, Candace used the strategy with her special education students. And for the Title I students, she did not use this strategy. So according to Hasbrook and Tyndall table, 3rd grade students usually make an average weekly improvement of 0.8 to 1.2 words per week. Notice this number here. The students receiving special education services using Candace's strategy gained an average of 2.35 words per week on cold, unpracticed readings. And notice the difference in those Title I students. So of course, Candace wanted to try the strategy with those other students. 13 weeks later, those students also showed an average fluency gain of 2.15 words per week on cold readings. There are more examples of effectiveness on our website. Here are just 2 studies that have been done on the Read Naturally strategy. So here's a table that has information about all 4 of our programs built into Read Live. Just briefly, Read Naturally Live is our flagship fluency intervention. It also supports vocabulary, comprehension, and phonics. About 80% of our users are in Read Naturally Live. Word Warm-Ups Live is a separate phonics intervention. Many of our students work in Word Warm-Ups Live for phonics support, and it can also be paired with Read Naturally Live for fluency intervention. 1 Minute Reader Live is our structured independent reading program. This offers reading practice for any student in your classroom. Whether they're already working in Read Naturally Live or Word Warm-Ups Live, they can also work in 1 Minute Reader Live for that important structured independent practice time. Read Naturally Live Español is presented entirely in Spanish. It can be used to build Spanish reading fluency for native Spanish speakers or to support Spanish reading development for any student learning Spanish. Make sure to check our website for upcoming webinars on our other programs. Today, we're going to be taking a closer look at Read Naturally Live. So Read Naturally Live focuses on fluency and phonics, and our students are going to benefit from the additional support it provides in vocabulary, spelling, and comprehension. The students work through audio-supported steps to read each story accurately and fluently, and then they demonstrate their understanding by answering questions about each passage. Here are some of the benefits for students. Students are going to be motivated to read short, nonfiction passages as they build their fluency. There's audio support built into the program that helps our students increase reading accuracy and expression. They're also going to build comprehension and vocabulary skills through that repeated reading process. They'll develop automaticity in decoding through targeted lessons in the phonics series. Students work independently most of the time, and we'll talk about which steps a teacher is needed for in a little bit. And students are going to recognize their own improvement as they experience success, and it's also going to improve their attitude toward reading. Read Naturally Live includes 3 series, the Sequenced, Phonics, and Idiom series, with a total of 13 levels from 0.8 all the way up through 8.0. And the program's appropriate for students whose reading skills are between 1st and 8th grade reading level. The intervention range goes from beginning readers all the way up through adults who need to work on these skills. In order for students to make progress, they should work and Read Naturally Live in 30 to 45-minute sessions, 3 to 5 times per week. The more practice they get, the more quickly they'll improve. Here are the steps that students work through for each story in Read Naturally Live. So I'll be going through the steps of Read Naturally Live for a student named Melissa. This is Melissa's story options page. This is where the teacher can differentiate instruction for individual students by adjusting the story options for each student. Some of the changes might be turning off certain steps, adjusting the time limits for steps, adjusting the number of read-alongs and practices that the student needs to do. You can even add a Spanish read-along for native Spanish speakers, and you can enable recording features. For example, a teacher might decide that her younger students needs to have the prediction and retell steps turned off because they're spending a lot of time trying to keyboard, and we really want them to spend their time reading. For older students, you might decide to use a 2-minute or whole story timing to develop those students' reading stamina. And when a student is ready to exit the program, you might reduce the number of read-alongs or practices that student has to complete. So there are lots of different ways to differentiate for each student. Here's the first thing a student sees when they log into the program. Our Select a Story screen is going to show 12 of the 24 high-interest nonfiction stories at each level. Notice that some of these tiles are grayed out and have a yellow star. That means Melissa's already completed and passed those stories. There's also a story counter here to show how many stories Melissa's completed throughout the program. The student can choose to read any story that hasn't already been passed. So she'll click on the title to choose that story, and then we'll go on to the next step. This is the keyword step. It teaches the student key vocabulary words that are important for the story. They click on each word to learn the definition and hear the word read in a sentence. And in order to go on to the next step, they need to listen to each word being read. Notice the progress bar up at the top of the screen. That's going to show which step the student is currently working on, as well as what they have to do next. So when Melissa clicks on that first word, a pop-up is going to appear as the narrator reads the definition and uses the word in a sentence. She can read along with the narrator or listen to the audio. So the next step then is going to be the prediction step. This is where the student writes a prediction based on the keywords, title, and picture that's with the story. This is how we're preparing their mind for reading by requiring them to briefly think about that topic. There, you can see there's a text box here for the student to type in, and this step does have a time limit. By default, they have 2 minutes to complete this step, and then the next button is enabled when they start typing in the text box. All right, now the student is ready for the cold timing step. While she's waiting for her teacher to come and listen to her read, she'll play this fun game called Wordtastic. Notice there's a red border at the top and bottom of the screen. That lets the teacher know that the student is waiting for the teacher to log in and conduct that cold timing. While she's waiting, the Wordtastic activity gives great vocabulary practice at the student's reading level. So the student will click the best answer for each item and earn some points for each correct answer. So when the teacher's ready, she joins Melissa and clicks on Conduct Cold Timing and logs in. Now this is the cold timing step. So the program is going to time the student for 1 minute after they click on the Start Timing button. This is where we're going to get our baseline for measuring improvement and start that process of progress monitoring. When the teacher logs in, you can see the red border change to blue, indicating that the teacher is present. And it also says teacher present down here at the bottom. There's an optional reading guide that the student can toggle on and off and use as they're reading. You want to make sure that you're coaching your student to notice if they stop, stumble, or want to skip on a word. And then they click on those difficult words, they hear them pronounced, and those words will then be deducted from their final cold timing score as errors. So the teacher wants the student to kind of control the mouse during this step. You can also, in story options, change this requirement to allow the student to complete this step independently, but only if you feel like they're ready to do that. Some of our stories have more than one page, and when that's the case, the student's going to click on this button at the bottom to go to the next page. If the student reaches the end of the story before the timer sounds, they click on the Finished button, and that's probably going to happen with those shorter stories. Otherwise, when they're finished reading, they click on the Next button to go to the next step. Oh, and I want to point out, notice her cold timing score is going to be in this box, and it's also going to show up on this graph that pops up on the very next screen. This is really valuable information for the student to have at their fingertips to monitor their progress. It's a great motivator for them. Now we're going to go on to the read along step. So now the student has completed the keyword step, prediction, and cold timing. Those steps are what prepare the student to work in the story selected. Now they're going to start working towards mastering the story. The read along step is the teacher modeling step. The student will read aloud quietly with a recording of the story. They're going to learn unknown words and practice difficult words as they listen to that audio recording. The modeling also encourages proper pronunciation, expression, and phrasing. And each sentence in the story is highlighted as the student reads along with the narrator. Once again, the student can click on those vocabulary words to hear them pronounced and listen to a definition. There's also a Spanish read-along option for some levels. So the student might benefit from listening to the story in Spanish before they read the story in English. So once the student has clicked Start Read Along, they read the story aloud quietly with the narrator. They usually read along 3 times. Older students may only need to read along once or twice. Our younger students and students with disabilities may need more than 3 read-alongs. And you can see how many Melissa is required to do here with those stars. The default setting is 3 read-alongs. When she's finished with those 3 read-alongs, she'll click on the next button and move on to the next step. Now we're on the practice step. This is where the student is going to conduct a 1-minute timing for each practice, reading the story this time without the narrator. This is the repeated reading part of the Read Naturally strategy. It's going to help the student improve her fluency, master difficult words, and gain a deeper understanding of the story. So she'll start by clicking on Start Timing. She'll read the story aloud quietly and click on any words she doesn't know to hear it read aloud to her. Any word she clicks on is deducted from that practice score. For a 1-minute practice timing, they click on the last word that they read when the bell sounds. And you can see here their scores are displayed in the box. This is a really great way for them to see their scores improve. It's very motivating for them. As they improve over time, especially for older students, the teacher may require the student to do whole story timings, very useful for improving comprehension in those higher level, longer stories. So they're going to practice until they're able to read the story at or above their goal rate. Usually that's between 3 and 10 times before they reach their goal. By default, they need to practice at least 3 times, even if they already met their goal. But again, with that story options page, you can reduce the number of practices required. And to access the story options from this screen, you just click on the Teacher Apple button. So now, once again, we're going to move on to the next step, which is the quiz step. This is where the student's going to test their comprehension about the story. There are several different types of questions, including main idea, detail, context, story. And the number and type of questions varies based on their level and series. Question 1 in Melissa's level is always going to ask her to identify the main idea of the story. They're also going to be asked to identify the meaning of a vocabulary word. So as the students answer the questions, they can refer back to the story and they'll immediately get feedback on whether they're right or wrong. And there's also going to be an open-ended question that the teacher will evaluate during the pass step. Once the students answered all the questions, including this type of question that's more of a close activity, they'll click Next to go on to the retell step. So the retell step is where the student learns to comprehend, remember, and retell the story. They need to retell the story in their own words. And remember, they can go back and review the story if they need to. When I was working with younger students, some of them really struggled with this step and the typing component of it. So you can absolutely make accommodations for students with issues with keyboarding or writing, or you can turn this step off until you think your students are ready to try it. When the retell step is available and turned on, it is timed, and they have 5 minutes to complete it. So you can change that time limit as well with that story options screen. The student can't move on until something is typed in that text box. So now we're ready to take a look at the pass step. But before we do, I want to show you, this is Janelle. She's a younger student. She's working at level 2.5. By default, the retell step is turned off for any student who's working at level 3.0 or below in the sequenced or idiom series. And that's the case for Janelle. We don't want our students spending more time struggling with keyboarding and writing than reading. But you can absolutely turn that step back on using the story options screen. So back to Melissa. She's worked through all the steps. She's on the retell step, and we're ready to take a look at the pass screen for her. So while she's waiting for the teacher to conduct the hot timing, Melissa's going to practice reading the story independently one more time, or play the word-tastic vocabulary again, the vocabulary game again. Once again, the screen is red at the top and the bottom, so the teacher knows that Melissa's ready for her to come and work with her. So the teacher is going to click on Conduct Past Activities and log in. Now the teacher and the student are sitting together and the teacher's reading out loud. And the teacher this time is going to count any errors the student makes. So the student's going to read for 1 minute. When she's finished, the teacher will enter how many errors she made. She'll get a timing score in words correct per minute, and the teacher's going to rate Melissa's expression on a scale from 1 to 4, and then click on Next. So here's a new graph. We've got the cold timing and the hot timing score. Notice the cold timing score is in blue, and the hot timing score is in red. This is a really motivating visual for the kids. And teachers also appreciate the progress monitoring that's built into the program. Now the teacher is going to review the students' answers to those open-ended questions and the retell of the story. Here's the student's retell. So the teacher is going to decide if that retell met her expectations and then click on Next to continue. Under the Past Results heading, each of these items has a star next to it, which indicates the student has passed all of the requirements for the story. And here are the requirements. So Melissa passed all the requirements. Good for her. And now we go on to the congratulations screen. We hear a happy music. The student receives those gold medals and blue ribbons based on their performance during the story. And she's ready to go back to select a new story and start the process all over again. Okay, now we're going to take a look at our other 3 programs, not in as much detail. So remember, there are webinars available for each of these programs individually that'll give you a lot more information. But just briefly, Word Warm-Ups Live is the phonics intervention that's included in the Read Live platform. It focuses on phonics and also gives students additional support in fluency, spelling, and phonemic awareness. Students are again working through audio-supported phonics lessons, which helps them build automaticity in decoding. So here are some of the benefits. They're going to improve their word recognition skills. They'll practice reading words with specific phonics patterns with audio support, which builds their automaticity in decoding. They'll learn to decode increasingly difficult phonetically regular words. And they'll also have opportunities to read those words in connected text. Their phonics skills are going to be reinforced because they'll also be encoding or spelling those phonetically regular words once they've learned to decode them. So Word Warm-Ups Live has 3 levels. Level 1 reinforces first and second grade level phonics skills using 1-syllable words. Level 2 uses 2-syllable words to build automaticity in reading compound words, words with a variety of syllable patterns, and words with prefixes and suffixes. And then level 3 focuses on multisyllabic words. This program is great for students whose reading skills are from 1st grade all the way up through 4th grade reading level. And it's appropriate for beginning readers up through adults who need to work on these decoding skills. Students receiving Tier 1 instruction can work in Word Warm-Ups Live for 10 minutes per day as a daily warm-up. This will help reinforce and practice skills they're learning in their core program. For students in Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention, they can work in Word Warm-Ups Live for 20 to 30 minutes per day. And again, the more practice they get, the more quickly they'll improve. So here are the steps that students work through for each exercise in Word Warm-Ups Live. You can see there are word list exercises and story exercises for each level. Next is 1 Minute Reader Live, which is our independent reading program for any student in your classroom, not just students who need intervention. 1 Minute Reader Live focuses on fluency. Students are also going to benefit from support in vocabulary and comprehension. It's a highly structured, independent reading program with questions and activities that support vocabulary and comprehension. Here are some of the benefits. Our students will engage in self-directed learning. It's completely independent. They'll expand their knowledge base by reading interesting nonfiction text. They receive audio support that helps them learn new words and improve their reading expression. And as they develop their fluency, vocabulary and comprehension will also be strengthened. Their attitudes toward reading will also improve as they experience success, and they'll gain confidence as they complete the activities and see their success on those graphs, very similar to Read Naturally Live. There are 6 reading levels in 1 Minute Reader Live from early 1st grade up through mid 5th grade. Each level includes 8 books with 5 nonfiction stories organized around a theme. It's appropriate for students whose reading skills are from beginning reader up through mid 5th grade level. So for your beginning readers all the way up through adults. 1 Minute Reader Live is appropriate for students of all ages who would benefit from structured, independent reading. A student who's already working in Read Naturally Live can also work in 1 Minute Reader Live for independent practice time. If you have a student who's getting ready to graduate from Read Naturally Live, they can transition to 1 Minute Reader Live for that more independent practice. And as you're setting up Read Live in your classroom and listening to students read independently, they can work in 1 Minute Reader Live while you're busy placing your students. 1 Minute Reader Live can be used as an independent structured reading program. It can be assigned for at-home reading or as a summer reading activity. So here are the 6 levels in 1 Minute Reader Live. Remember, the stories are all going to be high interest nonfiction passages, very similar in content to the stories in Read Naturally Live, but the stories are different. So here's a comparison of Read Naturally Live and 1 Minute Reader Live. Read Naturally Live is intended for students who need intervention, while 1 Minute Reader Live is great for any student who would benefit from additional practice. The content is slightly different. The levels in Read Naturally Live range from 1.0 through 8.0, while 1 Minute Reader Live ranges from early 1st grade up through 5th grade. As far as teacher involvement, the teacher is required for cold timing and hot timing in Read Naturally Live, while in 1 Minute Reader Live, our students work independently. Both of these programs have reports that you can print out and generate to show other teachers or to show parents and monitor your students' progress. Here are the steps for 1 Minute Reader Live, and this is going to be in your handout so you can take a little bit closer look. Last but not least is Read Naturally Live Español. This program focuses on reading fluently in Spanish. Students are going to benefit from additional support in Spanish vocabulary and comprehension. Again, they're working through audio-supported steps as they read each story accurately and fluently and demonstrate their understanding by answering questions about the story. So here are some of the benefits. Students are going to be building fluency in Spanish. All of the passages are nonfiction. They have full audio support also in Spanish, so they're going to improve their accuracy and their expression while they're gaining comprehension and vocabulary skills in Spanish. Read Naturally Live Español follows the exact same steps as Read Naturally Live, so they're working mostly independently. Their attitude toward reading is going to improve as they experience success. Here's a closer look at what a passage in Read Naturally Live Español looks like. Notice all of the text is in Spanish as well as the audio support. There is this option down here at the bottom for the student to listen to the directions in English if they need to. There are 10 levels of content in Read Naturally Live Español, from 1.0 up through 5.6. All of the content and instructions for the student are delivered in Spanish. The student is also going to have access to the instructions in English. When the teachers are interacting with students, there's an English teacher menu, and the pass review screen can be viewed in either English or Spanish. The program is appropriate for students whose reading skills are between 1st and 5th grade in Spanish. And for intervention, it's appropriate for beginning readers up through adults who need to work on these skills. So Read Naturally Live Español is appropriate in a variety of scenarios for native Spanish speakers or who are either developing their Spanish reading skills or supporting their vocabulary and comprehension while they're learning to read in English. It's also appropriate for native English speakers as they're learning to read Spanish text fluently as a second language. So to see our students make progress, they should work in Read Naturally Live Español for 30 to 45-minute sessions, 3 to 5 times per week. Here's another comparison table, this time for Read Naturally Live and Read Naturally Live Español. We can see that there are definitely different uses, although both programs can be used, and we've seen them used in dual language classrooms to support Spanish speakers' acquisition of English as well as their fluency in Spanish. The content is going to be slightly different. The steps are going to be the same in both programs, with instructions available in English or Spanish. And then they both also have reports that can be printed out so that teachers and parents can see how the students are progressing. So here are the steps that students work through for each exercise in Read Naturally Live Español. So that was a big picture look at the 4 programs included in Read Live. We have Read Naturally Live, Word Warm-Ups Live, 1-Minute Reader Live, and Read Naturally Live Español. If you need additional assistance in the future, we've got our help page on our website, and it's a wonderful resource. There are how-to videos, student guides, and links to the Smart Start Guide and the Read Live User Guide. And that page, again, is at readnaturally.com. So thank you so much again for joining me today. Here's our contact information in case you want to reach out with a question. You can also connect with one of our experts and get some expert help onboarding.
Thanks so much, Diana. I just want to remind everybody that we'll be sending out follow-up emails with links to the webinar recording and a handout in about 24 hours. Any quiz questions that we didn't get, or sorry, not quiz questions, any questions that we didn't get to today, we will send an email in the next couple of days. Please respond to survey questions that will appear on your screen after the webinar so we can continue to improve the educational experience for all of you and our future webinars. And please follow us on your favorite social media platform. Thanks so much for joining us.